going to be louder than the thunder today, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, we want to welcome anyone that might just be tuning in. We'll have a quick word of prayer for those that might be tuning in over the internet. Father, we thank you so much for bringing us together on your Sabbath day to study your word. Pray that you'll bless this time, that you would open our understanding, and that you would use your word and your spirit to transform us into the people that you want us to be. Please empower us to glorify you in everything that we do. Use us for your glory and for your kingdom. We thank you for everything. In Yeshua's name, hallelujah. Today's message is entitled, Deny Yourselves. And last week, the message was circumcised through crucifixion. And that's actually a biblical theme that we need to get rid of our flesh. And we do that through the power of his resurrection. He empowers us to crucify our flesh. But this is going to be kind of like a part 2, which I didn't really realize that until this morning. As I was putting all this information together, let's start off in Genesis chapter 3. Starting in verse 1. Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which Yahweh Elohim had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath Elohim said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, Elohim hath said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die, for Elohim doth know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as mighty ones, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired, to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. So the first thing the serpent needed to do was cause her to doubt what Yahweh's word was, to entice her with her eyes, with her appetite, and with a desire to be wise, to be like Elohim. So why would the serpent do this? Let's look at, now, just a mental note. All of this is tied in with the desires and appetites of the flesh, which is what we're trying to crucify. Let's look at Isaiah 14, verse 12. Why would the serpent want to tamper with Yahweh's creation? Isaiah 14:12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of El. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Notice all the I's there. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to be above him. I'm going to be like him. That's what he told the woman. When you eat it, you're going to be like him, knowing good and evil. So pride was the fall of Lucifer, and he tempted Adam and Eve, or tempted Eve, to follow their appetite, to disobey the Creator, to doubt his word, and to indulge in their appetite, which would make them wise and be like Elohim. Now let's look at Matthew 16, and Yeshua is going to tell us what the cost is to follow him. Matthew 16 and verse 24. Then said Yeshua unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his stake and follow me. Now, deny himself and take up his stake, or crucify himself, is basically what it's saying. And that's what last week's message was about. Denying our fallen, fleshly, rebellious nature and following him. For whosoever will save his life, the old man life, shall lose it. But whosoever will lose his life by denying himself and taking up his cross will find it. For my sake shall find it. And let's look at Mark 8:38. This was at the end of the same verses that we just read in Matthew. This was a little addition to that. In verse 34, it says, and when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his stake and follow me. And the rest of it is pretty much the same, except for verse 38, whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And Luke 9:23 is worded just a little differently. Luke 9 and verse 23. And he said to them all, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Kind of reminds you of the verse where Paul said, I die daily. We have to crucify this flesh daily, because the flesh has an appetite of its own that wants to bring us into submission, to make us its slave. But Paul tells us, let not sin therefore reign or rule over you in your mortal body, that you should obey the lusts thereof. This body that we're dragging around every day wants to bring us into submission, but he empowers us to bring the body into submission. A little review, a couple verses from last week, Romans chapter 6. And keeping in mind, we have to deny ourselves and pick up our cross daily. Romans 6:6 says, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth, meaning from now on, we should not be slaves of sin. So if we're truly empowered by him to take up our cross and crucify the flesh, we should not be serving sin anymore, because the flesh wants to lure us into sin, just like it happened in the garden. Doubting the word of Yahweh, following our appetites, being slaves of the appetites of the flesh, brings forth sin. And the enemy, the enemy brought Yahweh's creation under submission to the flesh, and Yahweh is giving us the power to bring the flesh back into submission. Let's look at Galatians 2 and 20. I am crucified with Messiah. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Messiah liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of Yahweh, who loved me and gave himself for me. Remember what we read earlier? He said, he that loses his life will find it, but he that loses his life will find it. That's the same principle here. We crucify our old life, and now Messiah lives in us, which is the new life. 5:24 of Galatians. And they that are Messiahs have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. And 6:14 of Galatians. But certainly not that I should glory, save in the cross or the stake of our Master Yeshua Messiah, by whom the world is crucified unto me, and I unto the world. I am dead to the world. The world has no power over me, because I'm not walking in the flesh anymore. I'm walking in the Spirit. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9. In verse 24. First Corinthians 9:24. Know you not that they which run in a race run all, but one receives the prize? So run, that you may obtain. And every man that strives for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now that word temperate is 1467 in your Strong's Concordance, and it means self-control. And it's to control the appetite, especially referring to food or having relations. If you dig into that word, it's only used, that particular word is only used twice. We're going to look at another place a little later on where it's used. But if you're striving for this race to get the goal, you have to have self-control. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beats the air, but I keep under my body. That means to make your body a slave, to bring, I keep under my body. It's to treat the body severely and to bring it into subjection. And that literally, to bring it into subjection, literally means to make my body my slave. I make my body obey me. Why? Lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. And that word castaway is an unapproved reject. Paul had reverence for Yahweh to the point of knowing that if he did not bring his flesh into subjection, all that preaching would mean nothing, and he would be a reject if he did not keep his flesh in subjection. Let's look at Galatians chapter 5. Again, starting in verse 16. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. Was Eve walking in the Spirit when she fulfilled the appetites of the flesh? And it says that the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that you would. Meaning there's a battle going on between the Spirit and the flesh. So as believers, if we're still struggling with fleshly things, what are we supposed to do? If we're still addicted to substances, if we're still addicted to things going on behind closed doors, if we're looking at things we're not supposed to be looking at, if we have food addictions, we can't push away from the plate, if we have anger problems, if we have impatience, if we have, actually we named a list last week, self-control, lust, pride, rebellion. If we still have any of these and a whole host of other things that the flesh can draw us into, what's the problem? Can we have it both ways? Are we allowed to walk in the Spirit and also walk in the flesh and give glory to Yahweh? Does it work that way? The Scriptures don't allow that. The Scriptures do not say it's okay to walk in the Spirit and to represent Yeshua on the earth, and it's okay to be involved in sexual sin and addiction and everything else. It doesn't work that way. It's one or the other. We can't continue in the appetites of the flesh and claim to follow Yahweh. He came to set the captives free. He came to give us deliverance. He came to empower us to do what? Walk in the Spirit and not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. So how do we know if we're walking in the Spirit? Let's go down a couple verses to verse 22. The Messiah said a tree is known by its fruit. Well, guess what the fruit of the Spirit is? But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such things there is no law. Now, love, I went and looked up a deeper translation of all these words. Love is affectionate, kind, charitable. So what if you're not affectionate? What if you're not kind? What if you're not charitable? Joy is cheerful, calm delight. What if you're not a cheerful person? What if you're not calm and delightful? Peace literally means to join, and it means to be at peace, quietness, or rest towards other people. What if you're not a peaceful person? Long-suffering literally means to be patient in suffering or able to suffer long, to have restraint under pressure. What if you can't suffer long? What if you're not patient in suffering? What if you don't have restraint when you're under pressure? Gentleness, moral excellence in character and demeanor, gentle, good, and kind. Goodness, the practice of being kind and charitable and virtuous. Faith, being fully persuaded and convicted of truth. Meekness, gentle, and humble. Temperance. Now this word temperance is related to the other word, but not the exact same word. And it's self-control, especially in the realm of having relations, that type. I'm trying to be rated PG here. But to be able to restrain yourself, self-control. Do these attributes describe who we are? When people look at us, do they see this fruit? Do they see a loving people, a joyful people, people who are at peace with other people, long-suffering, gentle, good, faith, meekness, temperance, specifically being able to control one's self? Now, if these fruits this fruit is not present in our life, let's say the opposite. Let's say we're not loving, we don't have joy, we don't have peace, we're not patient, we're not long-suffering, we're not gentle, we're not good, we don't have faith, we're not meek, and we don't have self-control. If any of these attributes don't apply to us, and we're actually living in the opposite, we're walking in the flesh, let's say we're struggling with it, what do? What if we can't overcome? We're impatient people, but we just can't help it. We're mean people. We're angry people, but we can't stop. Is it possible that there's something else we can do? Let's look at Matthew 17. Matthew 17, and starting in verse 14. And then when they were come to the multitude, there came to him a certain man kneeling down to him and saying, Master, have mercy on my son, for he is lunatic and sore vexed. For oft times he falleth into the fire and oft into the water. And I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him. Then Yeshua answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And Yeshua rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then came the disciples to Yeshua apart and said, Why could not we cast him out? And Yeshua said unto them, Because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Howbeit, this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. What if you have something in your life that you can't overcome? You have an obstacle that just seems to be there that you can't get rid of. What if you need a little extra strength and it goes out or departs from you by prayer and fasting? Let's look at Matthew chapter 4. And starting in verse 1. Then was Yeshua led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. He was led to be tempted. Led to be tested. And what happened before he was tested? When he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights. So in preparation of being tempted of Satan, he fasted 40 days and 40 nights. I would say that he was being strengthened for what he was about to go through. What if you knew you were about to go something? How are you going to strengthen yourself? I would follow the Savior's example. And when the tempter came to him, he said, if thou be the Son of Yahweh, command that these stones be made of bread. Notice the first temptation in the garden was appetite. And now the first temptation from Satan in the wilderness, after he was hungry, was to turn it into food. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. That was part of the reading today, wasn't it? Let's look at 2 Chronicles chapter 7, starting in verse 13. I'm sorry if I'm loud. That weather's kind of loud out there. Oh, you can hear me? Okay, good. We in good shape if Danny can hear me. All right. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 13. If I shut up heaven, that there be no rain, or if I command the locust to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now mine eyes shall be open and mine ears attent unto the prayer that has been made in this place. Now, he said if I send all kinds of devastation on my people, which usually is to get their attention, to bring them to this verse 14, if they humble themselves, pray, seek my face, turn from wickedness, then I'll listen to them. Then I'll listen to them. Let's look at Psalms 35, verse 11. This is concerning being humble. False witnesses did rise up. They laid to my charge things that I knew not. They rewarded me evil for good, to the spoiling of my soul. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer returned into mine own bosom. If you do a word study on fasting and humility, you'll find a connection. People humble themselves with fasting, and that was one of the prerequisites of his prayers being heard in 2 Chronicles, or his people's prayers being heard in 2 Chronicles 7, to humble themselves. Let's look at Matthew 6 and verse 16. Moreover, when you fast, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou fast, anoint thine head and wash thy face, that thou appear not unto men to fast, but unto thy Father which is in secret. And what's going to happen? And thy Father which sees in secret shall reward thee openly. So he doesn't want his people to brag or boast about fasting like a show, but don't try to disfigure your face or make a show of fasting, but do it in secret, and he will reward you openly. Look at Matthew chapter 9 and verse 14. Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but thy disciples fast not? And Yeshua said unto them, Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then they will fast. Acts chapter 10, starting in verse 1. And the reason I was pointing out that last verse is he said his disciples, his followers, will fast when he's gone. Acts 10:1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian band, a devout man, and one that feared Elohim with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to Elohim always. Notice the fruit that is prevalent in this devout man. He reverenced Yahweh with all his house. He gave much alms. He was benevolent to the people, and he prayed always. He saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day, an angel of Elohim coming into him and saying unto him, Cornelius. And when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, What is it, master? And he said unto him, Thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before Elohim. And now send men to Joppa and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. Now most of us are familiar with this story. This righteous man Cornelius, because of his righteousness and his prayers to Yahweh, he was an instrument in salvation being turned over to the nations. Now let me tell you how Cornelius described this account. Let's flip over to verse 30, same chapter. This was the defining moment. And Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour. And at the 9th hour I prayed in my house. And behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing and said, Cornelius, thy prayer is heard, and thine alms are had in remembrance in the sight of Elohim. Send therefore to Joppa, and call thither Simon, whose surname is Peter. And he is lodged in the house of one Simon a tanner by the seaside, who when he cometh shall speak unto thee. He's just recounting the story that we read in the beginning of the chapter, but it's interesting. He said, I was praying and fasting when this happened, when I was visited from a heavenly being. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 5. 1 Corinthians 7 and 5. Defraud ye not one the other. Now this is referring to a husband and wife. You can do the math. Don't defraud each other. Except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. And it's that word let me just continue to read. But I speak this by permission and not of commandment. For I would that all men were even as I myself, but every man hath his proper gift of Elohim. And it's referring to being able not to have that desire. Some people have that gift, but if you don't have that gift, do not defraud yourselves, because by defrauding yourselves, Satan can tempt your appetite, and and so the only time you separate in the marriage concerning that relations, you do it for fasting and prayer, but you come together again that Satan not tempt you. For I would that all men, verse 7, for I would that all men were even as I myself, but every man hath his proper gift of Elohim, one after this manner and another after that. I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I, but if they cannot contain, that's the word I was looking for. Remember I said a little later on we're going to revisit the other place where that word is mentioned. That's it, 1467, and it's self-control. And here it's definitely talking in a relations context. But if they cannot have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. And there's two theories as to what that's referring to, burn in lust or burn in the end. Let's look at 2 Samuel 12. Second Samuel 12:15. And Nathan departed unto his house, and Yahweh struck the child. This is the child that came from David and Bathsheba's sin. And Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. David therefore besought Elohim for the child. And David fasted, and went in and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose and went to him to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. And it came to pass on the 7th day that the child died. And the servants of David feared to tell him that the child was dead. For they said, Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spake unto him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. How will he then vex himself if we tell him the child is dead? But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto his servants, Is the child dead? And they said, He is dead. Then David arose from the earth, and washed, and anointed himself, and changed his apparel, and came into the house of Yahweh, and worshipped. Then he came to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he did eat. Then said his servants unto him, What thing is this that thou hast done? Thou did fast and weep for the child while it was alive. But when the child was dead, thou did raise and eat bread. And he said, While the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, Who can tell whether Yahweh will be gracious to me that the child may live? So he was trying to have his voice heard by humbling himself, by fasting and praying. But now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. Let's look at 2 Chronicles chapter 20 and verse 1. It came to pass after this also that the children of Moab and the children of Ammon, and with them other beside the Ammonites, came against Jehoshaphat to battle. Then there came some that told Jehoshaphat, saying, There cometh a great multitude against thee from beyond the sea to the side of Syria, and behold, they be in Hazazon Tamar, which is En Gedi. And Jehoshaphat feared and set himself to seek Yahweh and proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. And Judah gathered themselves together to ask help of Yahweh. Even out of all the cities of Judah they came to seek Yahweh. How did they seek Yahweh? By fasting. And Jehoshaphat stood in the congregation of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of Yahweh before the new court, and said, O Yahweh Elohim of our fathers, art not thou Elohim in heaven? And rulest not thou over all the kingdoms of the heathen? And in thine hand is there not power and might, so that none is able to withstand thee? Are not thou our Elohim, who did drive out the inhabitants of this land before thy people Israel, and gave it to the seed of Abraham thy friend forever? And they dwelt therein, and have built thee a sanctuary therein for thy name, saying, If, when evil cometh upon us, as the sword, judgment, or pestilence, or famine, we stand before this house and in thy presence, for thy name is in this house, and cry unto thee in our affliction, then thou wilt hear and help. And now let's skip down to the results of this praying and fasting to be heard of Yahweh. Look at verse 14. Then upon Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jael, the son of Mattaniah, a Levite of the sons of Asaph, came the Spirit of Yahweh in the midst of the congregation. And he said, Hearken ye all Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou King Jehoshaphat, thus saith Yahweh unto you, Be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but Elohim's. Tomorrow go ye down against them. Behold, they come up by the cliff of Ziz, and you shall find them at the end of the brook, before the wilderness of Jeruel. You shall not need to fight in this battle. Set yourselves, stand ye still, and see the salvation of Yahweh with you. O Judah and Jerusalem, fear not, nor be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, for Yahweh will be with you. And Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell before Yahweh, worshiping Yahweh. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's many other verses about people wanting to be heard, people wanting to be healed, people wanting Yahweh to hear their prayers. And they humbled themselves and sought his faith. Another example that comes to mind, Daniel chapter 9. Daniel knew that the prophecies of Jeremiah was about to come to pass. So it says he humbled himself, he fasted, he confessed the sins of the people. And right after that, all of those time prophecies that the people are looking for answers came right after he fasted and prayed. Let's look at Jeremiah 14. Going to be closing out here in just a minute. One more thing to consider when we're fasting: our motive, how we're living our lives. 14:10. Thus saith Yahweh unto this people, thus have they loved to wander. They have not refrained their feet. Therefore Yahweh doth not accept them. He will now remember their iniquity and visit their sins. Then said Yahweh unto me, Pray not for this people, for their good. Don't even pray for them. When they fast, I will not hear their cry. When they offer burnt offerings and an oblation, I will not accept them. But I will consume them by sword and by famine and by pestilence. We can't ride the fence with Yahweh and live in rebellion and think he's going to hear our prayers. But if we're having some type of struggle with the flesh, something we feel like we can't get over, maybe the answer is to humble ourselves and pray and seek his face, deny ourselves Sometimes denying ourselves might just be denying what the flesh wants. And the flesh wants all kinds of stuff. Anything that will destroy us, the flesh tends, and we can thank the world for advertising all their crookedness and wickedness. Every direction you turn, the world is there to lure you in and suck you into it. But we've been given the ability, when we surrender our lives to Him, He gives us His Spirit. He empowers us. But the point of today's message is, if you feel like you've got something in your life, some type of character defect, some type of addiction, if you feel like you can't get over it, maybe it's time for you to humble yourself, deny yourself, seek His face, and maybe, like we read in Chronicles, He'll say, the fight is not yours. It's Yahweh's. Just stand still and see His salvation. Hallelujah. And there's one more verse in James that would be good for us to remember. James 4, verse 8. Draw near to me, and I'll draw near to you. Hallelujah.